Hi, my name is Jason Osder, and I'm the director of Let the Fire Burn. And Let the Fire Burn is the story of a group called Move in Philadelphia. And this was a group that is a little hard to define, but they were an activist group, mostly African American, and they had occupied a house in Philadelphia and had barricaded themselves in and entered into a conflict with the Philadelphia police. The ultimate result of that was a violent confrontation where 11 people were killed and an ensuing fire destroyed 61 homes.
The effort has turned into a disaster. Can you describe the philosophy of Move?
We were being taught about the corruption in this system.
The system, the establishment, you.
Did you consider the Move organization to be a terrorist group?
People who threaten to shoot and kill neighbors, police. I think that's a pretty adequate description of the word terrorist.
So this incident happened in 1985 when I was growing up in Philadelphia, when I was a kid. And so I always remembered it from then, and I think I remembered it in a very distinct way. Because as a kid, it was traumatic for the whole city, and it was really a public tragedy. But as a child, it was sort of the first public tragedy that I really experienced. So if you think about being a kid, we sort of we're lucky enough to have that sort of sheltered childhood. You live in this protected space where your parents sort of tell you that, play by the rules, the world's a fair place, everything will work out, and then something comes along and you realize that the world's not necessarily a fair place, and that sort of shell of childhood is cracked. And for me, that was that moment. So it really stuck with me. And then I moved away from that city and went to college not that much later. And I realized pretty quickly that my peers, people my own age from other parts of the United States, were unaware of this incident entirely. And that really cemented in me the desire to tell the story. I still wasn't really ready to tell the story because I had no way of telling it. But then eventually I went to graduate school in film, documentary, and I finally put together this new process and rubric that I'd learned at film school with this story from my childhood. And that was really the genesis of the film, Let the Fire Burn.
The system had one intention: to either kill Move people or to put us in prison as long as possible. It's just that simple.
More than 36 Philadelphia policemen surrounded the building after a Move member was spotted on the roof wearing a hooded mask and carrying a shotgun.
We intend to seize control of the house. We will do it by any means necessary.
Every one of us knew that someone was going to die.
We didn't start intending to make an all-archival film. I did shoot interviews, and my model for a long time was roughly based on the film that probably a lot of people remember called One Day in September. And I thought a strength of that film was they didn't talk to everyone who might have something to say about, in that case, the '72 Olympics and the kidnapping. But they found a core of people who participated in this, and it changed their lives. So each interview represented this inside view and this pivot in their lives. And that was sort of my model. And I went about collecting these interviews, and I got a number of them that I wanted. I got into the edit room, and I brought the editor on. His name's Nels Bangeter. And one of the ways he talks about it that I think is very relevant is that I'd been collecting this stuff for almost 10 years at that point. And he came onto the project, and he watched everything we had, the archival footage, as well as the interviews. And it was largely his insight that, on one hand, the interviews on a whole weren't as strong as we'd like them to be. They weren't very revealing. There weren't a lot of new insights. It was difficult to sort of get below the surface of these people and even see an emotional insight from them. On the other hand, we had 3 weeks of televised hearings. The city staged this commission where they interviewed a lot of people and cross-examined them. And in those hearings, what Nels, the editor, realized is that we could do a lot of what you need to do with a talking head or a narrator: provide exposition and move the story forward, also provide context and background. And we could do that work, but without sort of the liability of the talking head. And when I consider it, I don't want to generalize because there's definitely exceptions to this, but in general, I think when you go to the talking head, you let the air out of the tire, you let the pressure out, you give the audience a break. Someone's going to explain it. I don't have to work as hard. And what we realized was we could serve those functions, but never let the air out of the tire. Keep that pressure building, keep that dramatic pressure building. And so we thought that it could be a special way of doing it. And, it's a process. Early on, you have this idea and you say, what if? Let's try it. And then little by little you find, I mean, those were some of the initial reasons. But as we did it, I would say we learned more and more reasons why we liked it and why it worked. And now when I talk about it after the fact, I'm able to think of many more reasons now that the film's done that it was a good idea, but it's much easier to back into those explanations. The truth is it's a creative process. You take a chance, you hope it works out, you figure out more along the way. Yeah, one of the motivations to make the film is to make this thing that I think should be known more well known, especially in the US, because I think it should be a part of US history at least, and it's just not. And I think there's the sense in which it's a horrible injustice that 11 people, 5 of them children, were killed at the hands of authorities, and no one's even prosecuted for this as murder or anything like that. But there's the feeling that there's a second injustice when it's not remembered, right? When these lives are swept under the carpet. And it seemed like there was a way to address that injustice with a film, or in fact, the documentary film has a nice potential to address that type of injustice. However, it's not an activism film. It's not a film where, upon leaving, I want viewers to, contribute money to the group or contribute money to the police or, whatever, make a new commitment to recycle or not eat, non-dolphin safe tuna or whatever. It's not like that, right? It's not a call to action in that way. What it is something that I hope provokes a lot of critical thought and causes people to have to deal with it in a way and have a lump in their stomach. And the result of that, I hope, is that people look around the world more critically and ask questions about this type of violent incidents and ask, where is violence being done to people with no regard for their humanity? Where are children being sacrificed for the ideals of adults and not being protected? Take a step back and use the incident more as a morality play to ask questions about how we sort of fail as societies and as humans in some of these instances. And I think when you do that, it's very rewarding for me when in screenings and Q&As, people bring up, this reminds me of this or this reminds me of that, but it's very diverse what it reminds them of. Sometimes it's in international affairs, sometimes it's something local to their neighborhood. And that this pleases me. That's what I want. And I think it's not the type of film where I want a specific action. It's more like art in that way. I want it to raise consciousness. I want it to cause people to have to think about it. Maybe it means they read the international section of the paper when usually they don't. Maybe it means they pick a new book at the bookstore that they wouldn't have thought of before, and they just do some more research on a different incident of social injustice. Right, but it's indirect. It's not a sort of a cause and effect activism film. It's more of a moral, artistic piece that I hope causes people to just think hard. So the film features both live news footage as well as these commission hearings, and both are sort of extraordinary in their own way. And I think they do serve different purposes in the film. The news being very sort of action-packed and compelling in that way, and the hearings being almost more of a morality play and getting into sort of the nature of truth and responsibility and things of this nature. Interestingly, in the edit room, we went back and forth about these issues a lot. It was my feeling generally that you wanted to show it in the news, show a scene, and then use the hearing to sort of unpack or explain it. My editor often had the opposite notion, and he felt that the hearing scenes were so compelling that often they could lead and they could be the heart of the film itself. So I'm not sure which really takes precedence, because we had I think a healthy tension in the edit room about sort of which one of these dialectics was at work when. So I think it's on a surface level, it's sort of easy to think that one is the real-time thing and the other is sort of taking the place of the talking head. But in fact, that wasn't even always true, and sometimes the hearings themselves are so dramatic in the human interactions between people, more than explanatory, at least symbolic, if not in and of themselves, truly a dramatic conflict in the hearing room. On the other hand, as much as the news footage is meant to be sort of this real-time play out of the events, it also has its own sort of critical dialectic going on about the news and how it covers things. And I at a certain point thought sort of a media critique would be more central to the film. I think the way it worked out, that media critique is more backgrounded. But I think, in fact, the interplay between those two things is if anything, more complex and begs a lot of questions about sort of the nature of truth and the nature of different types of investigation into truth. And it in fact is very complicated, and sometimes what's dramatic in one place is, it's surprising. It was surprising to us in the edit room. One of the things that I think is in play in the news footage is that this was really at the dawn of a time where news went live and stayed live. And you can see that all over the place. And there's a scene where one of the commentators, he's on air and his tie is untied. And it's not a big deal, but today, they would certainly say to him, either take the tie off or tie it, right? And you can see that sort of almost amateurness creep in, as well as something I find very interesting from a filmmaking point of view. When you have a context you understand, it's a commentator talking to the news, and then all of a sudden he's ducking bullets and trying to, and the scene breaks down, and it sort of moves from the familiar news context into a documentary context as it breaks down and as you're seeing through the cracks. So there was a lot interesting about that. And then the hearings were very unique. It was unique that they were televised. It was one of few times that this has happened in the United States. I mean, there are other times. We had a commission on the Kennedy assassination, and we had a commission on 9/11. But this is what's known as an extra-legal body. It wasn't a court of law. It was just that the city convened a panel to investigate this. So it was really rather unique and dramatic. And the interactions are dramatic, and the shooting is rather dramatic. And we were impressed when we found that. So it was organic, though, in terms of process. It really was organic. You figure it out as you go along. And in a lot of ways, the process of making the film, the film's got a lot of accolades for editing, and I'm very proud of the editor, Nels Bangeter, and I'm thrilled that these accolades are coming in. But one of the things we both talked about was once we changed one of the initial conditions of this film, that is, leave out the talking heads, don't have a narrator. I think good films, they set their own sort of truth proposition. They have their own rules, and it's sort of on the film to introduce you to those rules early on. One of my colleagues likes to say, if it's a musical, someone has to sing in the first 5 minutes, right? And so you set up these rules. Once we sort of changed one major thing, we just tried to cut a film. We didn't think about what it means that we're not using talking heads anymore besides deciding it. Once we decided it, we tried to sort of play the game out. We changed one rule and then just tried to make a movie. And so a lot of it just works out the way it works out. It wasn't, there's theory involved making the initial choice, but then once that initial choice is made, a lot of it is just trying to do, well, I mean, people ask, was it difficult to cut the film? And I say, well, yeah, I mean, every film's difficult to cut, and any good documentary is a well-edited documentary. If you say it's well-edited, that's synonymous with being a good film, in my opinion. And so in those ways, I think, in a lot of ways, it was similar to cutting an observational or verite film that has a relatively large shooting ratio, and you deal with all the same things, and you just try to get it to work. And I'm pleased that I think it works.